different little
All right, good morning, everybody. Here we are, February 10th, and we're working on our budget. And today it looks like we're going to work on operations and capital improvement. Mr. Manager, I'm going to quickly turn it over to you, and let's get going.
All right, thank you, Mayor, council members, general public that are with us. Yes, this morning is dedicated to our annual budget discussion. This is the city manager's recommended budget for council consideration. Just as a reminder, there is no decisions to be made this morning. This is a presentation and the first opportunity to show you the entirety of the operational budget as well as the capital listing. And with the full expectation that there would be further yet conversation as we go through the document and over the next several weeks with the approvals scheduled through the month of March. Now, we do have the tax rate and the levy maximum and the cap that will be on the next council meeting, but that's simply one piece of that, which good news, you've all heard from me, there is not a recommendation to increase the tax rate, so we felt comfortable going ahead with that levy amount. You'll hear about some shifting of the tax rate, a little bit of that, but the total tax rate would not be changing. I want to first say my appreciation that we try to make this look easy when we can, and yet there is a lot of work that needs to happen to prepare these budgets each year. That means the departments are working with their budget analyst through Joe and his staff within finance with Nick, and there's a lot of participation in that. We take your input throughout the year and from prior years to try and fit things in where we can. So I want to send out my appreciation to all the hard work that the budget analyst and the departments are putting into this. That includes a lot of work from legal at times, making sure we're doing things properly. And then there is a lion's share of logistics that our engineering department needs to work through to make sure that once the financing is in place, that they can actually get these all these projects, these record-setting amount of projects completed, and with the least amount of disruption. Because obviously, when you do a record amount of capital improvements across our city, they're noticeable. Let's say it that way. So I again want to send out my appreciation to those departments as well. Again, an opportunity to see what the recommendation looks like, and then have further discussions the next 3 or 4 weeks before there's any vote to actually finalize that. So with that, I will send it over. I believe Joe gets to start with the operations, and they'll tag team throughout the morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Joe Brandstetter, Deputy Finance Director. Thank you all for being here today. I just want to dovetail a little bit on what Scott said about the amount of work the budget staff puts into this. We have thousands of line items and departments, and each analyst works closely with the departments to find ways to get their requests and needs in the budget and try to minimize the impact as much as possible. So shout out to my staff of Jessica Butler, Jay Carlson, Kayla Morrison, Ian Corporal, and Michael Gouvers, who all do a great job. I'm going to be talking about our operations piece of the budget. We're going to focus mainly on general fund, road use tax, and local option. And budget documents were distributed to council, and those are posted online as well. If you have any questions about those documents, we go into a lot of detail about specific revenues and expenditures. So any questions, feel free to reach out to Nick or myself on those. As far as an overview goes, we are committed to maintaining the high service levels expected from our residents. We are maintaining our current tax rate of $16.61. We have been at that rate since fiscal year 21. We are shifting 5 cents from our debt service levy to our operations levy. We do have different levies, and we're able to shift 5 cents to help cover our operational costs that are reflected within this budget. Some additional service levels you will see in this budget. We are increasing our IT network security staff significantly, and we're adding a sustainability position. We're also adding a public safety equity position within the city manager's office. We're adding a principal traffic engineer, which is covered by road use tax primarily. That actually is offset by reducing some of our contractual costs. We're also increasing our wages for our seasonal staff. I believe this is either the third or fourth time we've been able to bump those up to stay competitive. We also, this has been presented at council workshops, we've included a budget for the tall grass program that we'll be taking over from Polk County coming this calendar year. And then also included in our operational budget is a replacement of the legacy police in-car camera program for all the cameras they have within their police vehicles.
Sorry, can you go back
Sure.
for a second? You said we're shifting from 5 cents from the debt levy over into general fund?
Correct, yes.
Okay, did we go the opposite direction last year?
No, we went the same direction last year. So over the past 2 years, we've shifted 10 cents from our debt service to our operations.
10 cents total in the last 2 years? You're saying
Correct.
5 cents each year?
Yep.
Okay. And then, so we have the public safety equity position. There was a second equity position that was potentially, we potentially were going to have, which is not included?
That is correct. We're going the route of the contract that we had discussed and let that get along the process a little ways, and then look mid-year at that position potentially, depending on where we're at financially.
I would just like to voice my support for that position. I think that it's going to be important, especially for us to reach our equity goals. It would allow us to do this operation of equity mapping, which would help a lot of our more practical departments be able to take an equity lens to the work that they do. And so I would definitely like to see that. I'll be advocating for that mid-year.
We do have funding in the 23 budget to reflect the equity study. I believe we do have RFPs we're reviewing now. So I anticipate that study, defer to Manisha on that, but sometime in calendar year 23, hopefully that study's out.
And just for clarity, the equity study and the equity data and mapping were two separate issues, but I'm happy that we have the study going. Absolutely.
This just shows examples of the core services the city's providing: fire, police, public works, parks, and street improvements. Those are our largest categories of what we do, and we'll get into greater detail on those in the coming slide. This is the pie charts of our revenues and our expenditures. On the left, you see our revenues, and on the right are our use of funds or our expenditures. Of note, on the revenue side, you can see that 57% of our revenue is from property taxes. Some of those other fees you see for fees and charges for services, a lot of those are things like our indirect cost allocation, which we're charging the enterprise funds for their use of the general fund for. Our payment in lieu of taxes, which we covered in some of the other presentations, for our enterprise pieces that are not paying property tax, they're charged a pilot fee. And then we're seeing some of our ambulance charges and airport reimbursements for police services reflected in that fees and charges for service. You also see fines at 3%. That includes parking violations. Our ATE revenue is listed there as well. And other fines are listed there too. Also, you see hotel motel tax. This is a significant revenue source for us. We'll get into this a little later, but 4/7 of that does go out to our community partners in Bravo and Catch Des Moines, and we do make a payment to the zoo as well. On the expenditure side, you can see that personnel services is our largest category. Human capital continues to be our largest and most expensive asset that we have. As far as the contractual services and the use of funds at 15%, the largest three coming out of those are those payments that I referenced to Bravo and Catch Des Moines, as well as our payment to our automated traffic enforcement vendor, GATSO, and then our vehicle replacement, cost of replacing our vehicles within the plan. And the other charges, we have things like legal settlements, work comp, some of our police and fire medical payments are in that other category, along with what we call a contingency appropriation to cover some of the unexpected things that hopefully don't happen each fiscal year. This is a chart showing basically the last slide, but giving you a little bit of historical context. The dark bar on the left is the expenditures, and the bar on the right is the revenues. Just a couple things to call out. You can see in fiscal 19, we did have a surplus in fiscal 19, and then in 20, a slight deficit. That was planned based on the additional revenue in 19 from a garage sale and a transfer for property buyouts from stormwater. And then we anticipated, as part of that 2020 budget, a slight deficit. So we kind of grouped those 2 years together. You can see from 21 on through 24. Again, this presentation is focusing mostly on the 23 amended and 24 recommended. But you can see we do have a balanced budget in those years. And we'll get into that a little later too. But you see the far slide on the right is fiscal year 25. This is not in the budget, but this is just more for future planning. You can see that our expenditures are planning to exceed our revenues. That's just based off of our current personnel costs. So this is the 25 budget hasn't been developed yet, but just for council's awareness, just for status quo, to keep up with salaries and inflation, we are looking at a slight gap in 25.
What is you said it's just personnel costs are going to outstrip our revenue?
Largely, the way we did the projection was in 25, we included an inflator on all our personnel costs, just without really adjusting, without diving into great detail on the revenues. But at our initial glance, we can see that our personnel costs are going to increase. And right now, the revenues currently are not covering those costs. And as we develop the budget, just like we're doing this year into next year, we will tweak that a little bit. But just something that Nick and I wanted to make sure council is aware of is our costs are increasing across the board, and we will need to take a look at trying to get that balance in 25.
So it looks like to me as well, like the 21 through 23, obviously 24 is going to be balanced evenly because we're writing it and it's not the actual, but 21 through 23, it looks like we had that sort of surplus, but it was getting smaller and smaller. Is there a chance that in 24 our expenditures are going to outstrip our revenues as well? And when it comes to the actual amended?
That's always a possibility, but understand as the year goes through, new projects get identified that have new revenues attached to them, so we're always trying to match that up throughout the year with any changes as well. The contingency is there to take on any unexpected costs as well, I should say, to a limit. And it's just not unusual that even though we approve the budget at this point in the year, we're constantly making adjustments as new items get added.
How much does our personnel cost change?
We have a slide
Yeah.
later that shows our personnel costs.
I mean throughout the year. How much do they adjust throughout the year?
We do a pretty good job forecasting those. So we can say with confidence within 24, our personnel costs should remain about the same. I think when we amend the budget to basically mid-year to catch any changes, and I think it was very minimal from recommended to amended, our adjustments to the salary. So we've done a really good job of forecasting those. So I'm confident in the 24 number from a personnel standpoint. If we do add positions, though, or if we do change positions, sure, that's going to change. But I'm pretty confident with our 2024 personnel.
Scott, as we go through this, and I appreciate all your input and your thoughts on this, but Scott, this is not anticipating some of the changes that may take place on our revenue side up on the hill. Is that correct?
That is correct. Obviously, we're doing that analysis on the side, but at this point, nothing's finalized, so.
So this reflects whatever there is in place at this time, not the changes that
Correct.
have been proposed.
Correct.
All right.
So it could
Just
get
so
worse.
everybody knows that.
Yeah, that's a great statement. That was what, but Scott, as we go through and we work our way through this budget, I see the 24, we've got it pretty much even, but as we go to 25, you wouldn't look at well, let's say, depending on what they do, if all stays the same or at least close, are you looking at an increase in the levy then in 25?
Not at this point. It's not unusual to have this challenge 1 year out, and we start working on it right away. We locked this budget down in March, and this summer we're working on the next one. And so I don't want to sound alarming. As long as there aren't additional changes up there, I have every confidence between finance and the budget staff, we'll get this gap taken care of.
Even hiring the additional staff that you've got
Yes.
in this budget.
Yeah, and frankly, there will be needs for additional staff in 25 as well, so.
Okay, because I don't remember seeing this for 24 last year when we did this. We didn't anticipate something like that. So you're saying that it shouldn't be very alarming that we can work through this so we can keep the levy rate at least the same. Unless,
Yes, at this point in
unless
time.
something happens up at the.
One thing to note
The
too,
20
when you're looking at the 25, is that the revenue is basically flat. So we're not showing very much any revenue growth at all in the property taxes, which is the biggest percentage on that. So that's kind of reflecting the cost of all the expenses with inflators, but not the revenues. So
Well, that's an important fact.
yes.
Okay, let's move on then.
Sorry, was that, because we're not in an assessment year this year, is that correct? And so next year would be an assessment year, so we should see an increase?
Fiscal year 25 is anticipated as a reevaluation year. But at that point, there's so many things going on at the state level that might affect or cap that growth that we decided on that 25. It was more conservative to put that as a flat rate as of right now, not necessarily knowing what's going to head at the legislature.
So you don't even have 3% in there for
Nope.
growth? Okay.
So were there contract renegotiations this year, like union contract renegotiations this year?
Yes, we're still finishing up on 2 of those.
Okay.
a good
The police unions didn't have renegotiations this year, though. Is that correct?
No, it's fire and MEA.
When is that scheduled?
That's in discussions right now.
For the next, it was 3 years in the fiscal year 2020, wasn't it?
We have done multi-years quite a while, yes.
Okay, so that should be up and renegotiated for this upcoming fiscal year, for this fiscal year.
That's true. That's not been finalized, so yes, at that point, it's still an estimate.
Okay, I just do have to acknowledge, because it was said to activists in 2020 that our police costs, our personnel costs from police were going to outstrip our revenues. And we'd been warning about that for a while. And so this is concerning for me to see, knowing that that was said back in 2020, that our costs for police were going to outstrip our revenues. I'm concerned about that.
Okay. I'm trying to think where was that quote from?
You. And it wasn't in a public meeting, but it was said
Okay.
to activists in a private meeting with you back in 2020.
Okay, we can talk about that. I don't remember the full context of that, but
That's fine. But I just do have to acknowledge that is our highest personnel costs. And when I see that, that's what comes up for me. That's what I'm worried about.
So what would you suggest? Cutting the budget in the police? Is that what you're
Yes, I've been
suggesting?
suggesting that.
You are?
I've been suggesting that, yes. I ran on that.
And you have noticed that we've had a school shooting in the last 30 days and 6 murders. And so you expect that we're going to cut our police force?
Have they prevented that?
Have they prevented that? No, we probably would need more officers. So
That hasn't.
I'm not
Joe.
going to sit here all day and listen to a conversation.
Then don't start the conversation.
About cutting. You're the one that started it. So I'm not going to sit here all day. I don't think there's 4 people up here that want to cut the police.
No, I know there's not.
Okay, let's
There's
move
one, and
on.
I have the right.
Then let-
And I have the right
Let's
to say
move
that,
on,
Joe.
please.
Moving on to our major general revenues. As we discussed earlier, our tax valuations are basically, we did see a little bit of growth, but mostly flat. And we do have a slide. The next slide covers a little bit of our historical tax growth. Franchise fees, which is the 5% fee we charge on gas and electric, that's remaining relatively flat. And our other big driver, hotel motel, we are seeing an increase in that, which is positive. And we'll cover that in an upcoming slide. This is our historical taxable valuation. The orange line you see is the average growth among those years. So we're averaging about 3.26%. You can see in fiscal year 24, which is a revaluation year, or non-revaluation year, we had 1.4% growth. To some of the comments earlier, every other year we do see higher growth. So to your point, Councilmember Gatto, that last slide did not reflect any growth in property tax. So we hopefully will see above that 3.26 line in 25. It's just too early for us to tell at this point. I mentioned franchise fees earlier. We can see the historicals on these. A lot of these are weather driven. So you can see our 22 actual exceeds our budgets in 23, 24, and 25. That's just us being conservative and not relying on the franchise fees as much as we potentially could. Hotel motel tax, as I mentioned earlier, has increased significantly over what we had seen the past few years. 20 and 21 were obviously affected by COVID. And you can see in 23 and 24, we're expecting an increase. The increase in 23 is based off, we've received 2 quarters of payments already in 23. So we can project that 23 and 24 number based off of that. So that's positive news. And again, 4/7 of that is getting pushed out to our community partners.
I mean, that's a pretty significant growth, right?
It is.
That's almost a 25% growth. Do we push 25% out to the partners too when that happens?
Yes, it's all formula driven. So off the top, it's regardless of our revenues, it's going out directly to them on a quarterly basis. So we get the money from the state and immediately push it out to Bravo and to Catch the Moines.
And is that required by law, or is that something that we set?
That's a policy decision, I believe.
Actually, part of the agreement with the multi-community. So my understanding is that all the communities are doing that the same way.
Okay.
But Joe, can we change that percentage that goes out or, for Des Moines, for Bravo, or for Catch Des Moines? I mean,
Not without agreement through the other communities.
okay.
So there's an actual 2080 agreement that spells out how much everybody's putting in. So we'd have to bring that back to those groups to make additional changes. There's one very small exception with some money that we can hold back, and we can talk about that at a different point. But it's like the zoo.
Yeah, it's
Bravo.
That's
To the zoo, yeah.
We talked a little bit about revenues. Now we'll talk about expenses. As we mentioned earlier, our largest expense is those personnel services at 76%. That is salary, that's benefits, that's healthcare, that's retirement, that's all in cost of personnel across the city.
Could we see a breakdown of personnel costs by department?
Yes. I don't know if we have it in this slide.
Yeah, I figured you didn't. Just asking for it in the future.
Yeah. It is in the budget document. It's listed by departments for 22 actual, 23, and 24.
Specific by personnel.
Yes.
Okay.
By fund and by personnel, by department.
Okay.
Again, this shows our growth in personnel services over the past few years. As we've added additional staff, we do see those numbers increase. When we look at breaking down our general fund by department, public safety continues to be the largest driver of our budget. You can see the administrative services pie, that's a significant chunk. We did include city clerk, city manager, finance, human rights, human resources, civil and human rights, IT, legal, and mayor and council are all lumped into that admin cost. Also of note, you see engineering, they're largely funded by road use tax, so this is just reflecting the general fund portion of our personnel, of our general fund expenditures, excuse me.
Did percent of fire go down? I believe it was by 1%. Okay.
It might, yeah, they vary slightly, but it may have went down. I could check on that for you though.
Oh, Nick got it.
Oh, sorry. This is general fund by department. I do want to call out, you see administrative services. You're probably wondering why we're going from 41 in the adopted to 77.9 in the amended. A lot of that is related to ARPA funds. We did receive just about $94 million of ARPA funds. And as a way to help us get money out the door quicker, we're able to take a portion of that to the general fund and then pay those ARPA commitments that council had made out of the general fund. So it's more of an accounting transaction to move it to the general fund and then push it out the door. So that is the largest explanation for the change in admin services from 23 adopted to 23 amended. We still do see an increase in admin services from 23 adopted to 24. That's in part due to some additional transfers we did from revenues related to fire for the ground emergency medical transportation revenue we received. We're basically taking that and we're transferring it to the CIP, which shows up as an expense for fire-related projects. So that's roughly $2 million. Also, I brought this up before, is the additional payments to Bravo and Catch Des Moines. With that significant increase in hotel motel, there's a significant increase in expense as well.
And so administrative services is so high compared to everything else because so much of like the funds that you guys administer through finance are listed in finance under administrative service. So like Lost and a whole bunch of like anything that's not general fund or capital improvements. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we have a lot of what we call non-departmental expenses within finance that we're moving funds around. So that does account for a lot of that admin services. And it's also a lot of departments and a lot of personnel too. The bar graph earlier showed our balanced budget in 23 and 24. That's reflected here. From 23 adopted to amended, we do see we're anticipating a surplus of about $922,000 in the 23 amended, and the 24 budget we're getting by with about $200,000 of planned surplus in both those years. So we do have a balanced budget in 23 amended and 24 recommended. Quickly on road use tax, this is a money we get from the state. It's all formula based. Most of our road use tax it's about $33 million. And we're using those funds primarily on street maintenance, street lighting. We do use a little bit on street trees, and then the transfers are transfers to capital projects primarily to cover road-related projects. Historicals on road use tax, you can see we have just over $28 million in 22, and then we're again conservative with our estimates in 23 and 24, and assuming flat in 25. Moving on to our local option sales tax. These are the main categories that council had directed us when this was passed. to use funds on. The vast majority, nearly half, is going towards neighborhood improvements, and we can get into a little more detail on those. Street improvements and flood prevention is the next largest category, followed by public safety improvements and expenditures. Also, the other significant point to bring up about local option is by law, we are required to put half of that towards our debt service. That is reflected here. So immediately we do a transfer to debt service that reduces our need to borrow money and funds our capital projects. Changes. We're also increasing our street improvements out of local option from $6 million to $10 million in '24. I do want to note the flood prevention buyout line item there. We basically roll over what we don't spend to the next fiscal year. So we budget $400,000 a year, and anything that we don't spend gets rolled over. That's why you see $659,000 in the amended. Hypothetically, if that doesn't get spent, we would then roll that entire amount over to '24.
So with this, excuse me, with the street improvements, does that mean we're doing more, or does that just mean the price has gone up for what we've done?
Probably both.
Because I think that's important to note. You know, when folks that are listening or here, when we talk about it, it's an additional $4 million, but is an additional $4 million of actual more work than what we did the year, or is it? Or is it the cost?
We did add for a specific project out of that. I think it was Broadway for additional funding related to that. But the cost of our CIP, as you've seen on items you voted on,
Yeah, and
it's increasing across the board.
I appreciate the question too, because I believe $2 million of that is the Broadway additional cost, because the cost came in higher for that project for which the county is taking the lead, and we're helping contribute because obviously it's been part of our city. But the takeaway here is that for our planned local street system, we've added $1 million to go to 7. Is it 7 or 8? 7 million. And then Broadway and a couple other projects that have come in over budget are utilizing the rest. So I would anticipate moving forward that number to be 7 million and maybe a little higher if we can continuously add to it.
I just think that's when folks see that, that's important to know.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to neighborhood services, neighborhood improvements, excuse me. Just a quick note on that first one for Blitz on Blight. That's the local option portion of the program. We're also issuing bonds for that. So this is just the commitment from local option. I believe we issued $3 million of bonds last time around. But we do also contribute local option to that. Northside Community Center, you can see that goes from $2 million to $0. That's related to ARPA funds. We're funding that through ARPA, which frees up a little bit of local option. And we just have a variety of projects too. Of note is the expanded library hours, which basically we're transferring those dollars to the library to expand those hours. Parks capital projects includes a variety of parks projects within the CIP. If you do look at the CIP, we do have a page of projects by funding source, so you can see every single parks project or every single CIP project that's funded directly from LOST. So we are funding a lot of capital costs out from our local option as well. Special investment districts, that is Invest DSM. We're also transferring $1 million to the CIP for additional sidewalk capital projects as well. And Nick will get into sidewalks with our CIP presentation too. And also the one item that we have new this year is we are giving $100,000 to Des Moines Public Schools food pantry in fiscal year 23.
Right.
I believe so.
Not intended.
But we'll be able to revisit that, correct?
Now would be the time because you'll notice go back. That is coming out of 23, correct? So,
Correct. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was coming out of this year.
so we have the sufficient funds in the 23 to get that done now. So if there was a desire to do anything differently in 24, we've got a few weeks to talk through that.
100.
This is just out of that local option sales tax that you said you would have another 100,000 to.
That is correct, and
Okay.
so there was actually a
Three
half,
total.
well, there was actually a $500,000 that was originally coming out of ARPA,
Yes.
and this 100,000 would put us at 600,000 that was going to be split between the
Yes.
two.
How do they typically fund this? If, because this is something we just started, I think, with the ARPA funds and others. We haven't always given them $100,000.
No, all communications has been about one-time opportunity to fund this.
But how have they funded it,
As nonprofits, the fundraising aspect is a big part of what their
Okay.
budget. My understanding is that is a very high amount, a percentage of how they get their funding. There'd be some grants. I don't know if the food bank, quite frankly, I
It's
don't
from
know
food
if they
bank.
get grants from
They
the
would
state.
buy it from food bank or food bank. That's where
Yeah.
the school district had gotten their food.
And that partnership is,
Well, no, they are still doing it. This is giving them the opportunity to go out and purchase food that is specific to maybe the people that are in the schools, more culturally specific. They're buying additional food and personal hygiene products, which is one of the big things that they were asking for. They see a huge need in the pantries that they have in their schools. So they were looking at local wholesalers, grocery stores to bring in food.
Well,
Part of this,
can we see where they're at in halfway through the budget as we go through? Maybe
We can
would need
probably talk to 'em more.
amend it. It's because, typically we've done amendments
Mhm.
through half the budget cycle. I think that particular item, if we don't want people to go hungry, that's.
yeah, if that's a desire.
And I can just say, I think part of this was about, because I know I had received some information that not all of the schools had the food pantries. And
Not
there were
yet.
some schools
They have some.
in my neighborhood that really needed some food. So by doing this, we can get some food into those schools. When I saw the list of what Food Bank of Iowa was doing, it was going to like the downtown school and Greenwood. And it's like, wait a minute, where are our schools that really need it the most?
This was also to build out. Part of the money where the additional dollars was to give them the opportunity to build it out on their own. So that would be their equipment. And so it's like kind of a threefold: additional food and being able to buy the kind that the kids would take home and want to eat, and also build out the pantries.
I would remind council that the ARPA funds were sent to the local governments because of the pandemic. And in this topic of food insecurity, it's in response to the fact that the federal SNAP program, which is the food stamps, reduced significantly at the end of the pandemic. And they saw exponential increase in need and inability to provide that food. So that was in response to that, and I think it would be absolutely appropriate to bring them back in and see where their numbers are and
Right.
what the SNAP program changes have been.
Yeah, I will point out that there are proposed significant cuts to, well, not cuts, but changes in the SNAP program and what's going to be available potentially. So it would be good to continue that conversation.
Yeah, that item definitely needs to be revisited. Not necessarily as a line item right now, at least for me, but I do want to revisit that, because food insecurity for kids is, no one should be going hungry.
And
Not the way our community is based and the money that we have. No one.
okay, and the sales tax is the appropriate place for
Right.
that
Okay.
discussion to happen.
Okay.
So we'll do that.
Quick question, the street care, is that different than the street tree? Is this just keeping tabs? This is that Emerald Ash still, or what is that like?
This was additional plantings.
So that, okay.
Yep, and then in addition, we do have ARPA dollars for additional plantings too.
Okay, so that the ARPA is not being additive, it's replacing some of.
In total, it'll be an increase.
Okay. But this baseline is getting reset again, back down.
Yes.
Yeah, correct. There was a contract that we're intending to issue in 23 or 22 that didn't get done, so we rolled the money over to 23. So we're anticipating that contract to be out this year. Correct.
Okay.
Joe,
Yes, sir.
on the broadband permitting, so how is that an expense?
Sure.
Don't the Metrolink and Google pay us for the right of way?
They do.
Okay.
We did hire 3 additional staff, particularly to expedite the process of permitting and licensing, so that this is reflecting the equivalent of 3 positions within engineering and public works to get those approved as quickly as possible.
All right, and then when that broadband project goes away, do those positions go away, or?
Our anticipation when we did this a couple of years ago is they'd be filled through attrition through other vacancies within engineering and public works. So
Okay.
within a year or two, that line item should go away, and those positions, those individuals would be absorbed into other vacant positions.
Gotcha.
within the
All
city.
right, thank you, Joe.
The last piece of local option is the public safety component. We do have dollars budgeted for body camera replacements for the police department. We did have a one-time cost in 23. It was anticipated as a one-time cost for the fire department for a carcinogen reduction initiative. Again, that was just a one-time cost. Also, you see the firefighter positions. Initially, we had a SAFER grant that funded 13 firefighters. Last year, we added 6 additional firefighters, so this line item is reflecting the equivalent of 19 firefighter positions funded from local option. We also have our mobile crisis services provided through Broadlawn's contract. That's listed there. And then we do have 3 public safety positions and that equity position that we spoke to earlier, funded from local option. The reason for the increase from 95 to 450 is there was just a partial year in 23 for those additional dispatcher supervisor positions, and then the increase of the equity position in 24.
So Joe, you're saying the firefighter positions, we are at full strength plus 6?
We fund,
Authorized strength?
My understanding it was 3, that with the academy getting started, that we are just slightly over the head count of authorization. This line item is 19 firefighters in total that are being, the rest would be general fund expenses. So I think that's an important point to make, is that there is a reliance on the sales tax to keep that funding for the firefighters. So,
Well, that's what we said we would use it for.
Yes.
But so you're saying we are at authorized strength right now, plus 3 people?
Mm-hmm.
So there should be no excuses of why we have 2 rigs out of service half the time since we've had the new class.
Yeah, again, that comes down to daily leave discussions on how many people are out on different leaves.
I mean, it comes down to discussion, is the authorized strength correct to be able to
Yeah.
to man all the apparatus in the station?
Well, yeah, and we're about done with that fire study that
Okay.
looks at the staffing levels and the apparatus. We don't want the tail to wag the dog, so to speak.
Understandable.
And so, yeah, that discussion will start with how is the service levels, what's the response times, where are they located, and then what does it take for staff to handle that.
Okay. When we say we're at full strength and we still have rigs out of service, that's still an issue.
Right.
Because our residents, when they see 3 units in a fire station, they assume that those are fully staffed and being used throughout the city.
Yeah, and part of that discussion that we'll have is if we have opportunities to have different pieces of apparatus available, whether or not we take advantage of that, because obviously calls are very different one to the next, vehicle issues, medical issues at home, and then actual fires, and then large multi-residential or larger building structures. So apparatus matter. And if we have the opportunity to get different pieces of apparatus, we'll definitely be presenting that to council within this conversation that we'll have.
Can I ask one question? The cancer reduction initiative, 156,000, is this for the fire?
Yeah, fire suits.
And are we keeping up with technology? I mean, I know that it's a real hazard and our firefighters are very vulnerable. They're around hazard materials. Are there things that we could or should be doing to make them more safe?
So that was actually this initiative here in the personal suits. The other thing that they have done in the fire department is with the new fire stations that are being constructed and retrofitted, there is special areas designated for when they come right off of the scene of a fire to shed that equipment in a safest way.
I just want to make sure that we're putting enough money into that we can take care of anything that we need.
And just to, you talked about adding maybe different apparatus for different calls. I just, we need to be transparent with the residents that we're serving. You know, it's Councilwoman Schumacher and Councilmember Mandelbaum has a rig out of service in their ward half the time, if not more. So, I mean, that is something that their individual and the entire city, because it takes a hit, needs to know that and needs to be transparent. And so moving forward, I mean, just if we're fully staffed and we're going to switch that around once we get that study, we need to have that discussion publicly.
Yeah, absolutely, because it starts with the service level.
Okay.
So, yep.
Can I have a question? On the mobile crisis services that are we looking at expanding that? I know the discussion was talking about that we could use more people in the field work, so that would be working with Broadlawns. So I don't know if there's any talk yet. I know it takes a while to get more personnel, so just would like to stress that I think it seems like it's, for the calls that they're intervening on now, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, so there is no addition in the
Right
budget,
now.
in the 24 budget,
Okay.
so we need to continue that conversation. There are other initiatives to take pressure off of police calls. There's progress being made on sobering centers and,
Right.
and
Yeah, I
things
know
of that nature.
I'm working
So,
with Polk County on that.
and obviously,
Does the
Okay.
sobering center take pressure off police calls, or is it just a diversion for police to send
it will-
somebody there?
it
It
will
will
take-
take pressure. It takes pressure
it'll take
off.
pressure off.
Okay.
Length of time that's involved, and a lot of other factors.
Oh, yeah, understood.
In conclusion, just a few of our challenges and outside factors. We have seen over the past 5-10 years significant changes in state taxes with the how commercial is treated. That used to be taxed at 100, it went down to 90, and multi-res has slowly shifted down to that residential level of about 55%. So we do have existing backfills and a new backfill from the state for the business property tax credit, which basically taxes the first $150,000 of a business at the residential rate. There's no more application process, so every business owner gets that, or industrial owner gets that. So the rollback, we also are seeing losses from that. Rising cost of services, that was reflected in the presentation of inflation, increased personnel cost, and construction. And we did list several pending pieces of legislation, and Scott alluded to. None of these have been passed yet, but some of them are advancing, so we're monitoring those closely. And then our ATE revenue, which we're using to pay for the debt service on the public safety radio system, and an outdoor warning system replacement, which Nick will cover in the CIP piece. So we are reliant on those ATE revenues to fund our public safety operations. That concludes our operation component. If there's no questions, I will turn it over to Nick.
Any other questions, anybody? Thank you.
So I get the second and last topic for today. It is our capital improvement plan. Our capital improvement plan, that document did get sent out and put on the website February 2nd of this year. We do have 181 projects in total in that CIP plan when you're looking at the 5 years of 23 as amended, 24 through 27 in that 5-year plan. And a lot of the slides that we have here, we will reference to the specifics of the details for the projects. Would be best to look at that in the actual book itself. In general terms, we can talk about the projects themselves, but those project description sheets serve as a great detail for each one of the projects. So I'm going to cover some broad topics in the CIP overview for the council to take consideration as we talk about the CIP plan and what we need to be looking at going forward and how we need to be approaching it, a lot of our projects, and how we can stay stable with our debt levy and how our projects are being funded. So what we need to be looking at is trying to get to limit our general obligation bond issuance and using other sources if possible. The reason why we have to kind of look towards that is we need to be gearing our general obligation down to a component that keeps our rate at a lower, at our anticipated levels to be able to cover that principal and interest over the course of the 20 years that we issue the debt. We have to be very strategic about adding new projects because the rising rates and the market uncertainty for the interest rate cost can affect how much we can actually borrow for, as well as the inflation of costs. We have to kind of pay attention to as costs increase, as well as the borrowing increase, the interest rate cost for the borrowing comes at a higher level. We have to keep that down as much as we can. So we have to minimize what we can go with bonded issuance going forward. As you see in most CIP plans that we do every year, there is a carryover, a significant carryover from fiscal year 22 to 23. The fiscal year ends at June 30th, so that's in the middle of the construction season, so you will always kind of see that in any CIP plan that we put together. We did show, so we wouldn't throw off, the amended is already kind of got that carryover balance and costs. We were trying to show the ARPA funding in 23 as well, so that we have that in the plan, mainly in 23, so that we don't kind of throw off the 24 budget with ARPA funds coming in versus our regular sources. Right now, as we sit for our debt service levy with this plan, given our kind of conservative approach on what we think the growth will be for our valuations, we are actually forecasting some growths in the following years. It does right now show a potential need for 5-cent increases in 26 and 27. And there is limited opportunity with the rising interest costs to be able to refinance bonds to save us in the long run right now. And I think it's anticipated to continue to be higher in the next couple of years.
Do we have any anticipation on when interest costs are going to go down, or is that just kind of like we're just looking forward and we don't know how
If
far?
I knew that, I wouldn't be working here.
Fair enough.
As we look at the CIP expenditures over the course of this 5 years, again, you can see that fiscal year 23 is a very significant number at that $225 million. But it does also show a large investment in 24 as well, as we start ratcheting to more of a stabilizing and more closer to the number that we should see in that 27 and going forward. One, we've talked about the enterprise funds already, and things like stormwater, obviously, that 27 is, we're anticipating with the citywide study that will affect some of those numbers going forward.
So Nick, question with streets,
Yes.
the Southeast Connector.
Yep.
There's 59 million over. Is that with
That's
is that
within-
with no grant?
That's with the grant. Yes.
Well, that's with the grant. Okay.
So
And-
that
and if the
that is
grant-
reflected in that streets numbers. That's why you're seeing that 90 to 96.
Right. So this is our last year to apply for the grant, correct?
At least
No,
It's not. Okay,
it's just
good.
our best chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, are we going to be able to, we don't get the grant, are we going to not do it? And
So-
that's going to free up 59 million or what?
No,
What
I
are we
think,
going to do?
I think I'll have Pam or engineering
Okay.
come forward. We are phasing it. You may recall that we're going to get the construction from East 30th to East 36th,
Right.
and then take it south down to Vandalia, so that those properties have an including DART is interested in some property over there. So we have split the project into something smaller that would be left for the grant to seek. I'll let Pam fill in the gaps.
Good
if I
morning, Mayor and Council. Pam Cooks, the Assistant City Manager. As Scott was describing, we are phasing the project based on the available funds we have from the MPO. We have an allocation of $11.284 million. And then we have city funds available to fund from Southeast 30th to Southeast 36th. That gets us to DART's identified area for their potential facility, also makes the improvements on Southeast 30th. Then we have the grant dollars that we're applying for that go from Southeast 36 to the belt.
Okay.
The first phase would also grade the roadway and the bridge ends for that eastern section. So that fill would be in place and ready for the project.
So that's the 59 million. And then how much is the grant?
The grant is 25 million. The overall project is 58 million for construction. I don't have the numbers in the top of my head, but I think it's like 22 and whatever the other number is, 36.
The two phases.
The
Yeah,
two
it's
phases.
20 yeah.
Yep.
That's, so you've got 22 and you've got 36. But,
Yep.
But then it's going to take another 25 million to do it?
No, that 25 million is within that 36.
You're looking at the expenses
Okay.
here, and
Okay.
so the way
So
we're
the 22
covering
million
that.
is split 50/50 with MPO and city, and then the 36 is split 25, so almost 80/20.
I was just hoping it wasn't an $85 million project.
No.
That's
No.
the way that I was,
No.
That's the way.
This is the third year we'll be applying for the raise grant. Last year, they changed the scoring criteria, so we did not rate as high as we had previously. So we've revamped the application to, based on the input we got from DOT, to better follow that merit criteria and the scoring criteria.
And do we write the grant or does the
Yep.
MPO help?
We write the grant.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So projects by category is showing us the expenses, not the funding.
The funding is on a separate page.
Thanks, Pam.
We don't have projects by category with the funding, we just have the expenses and then projects by funding source.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder to, it would get a little too convoluted if we try to break it up by that granular.
You don't want to give us millions of charts?
I do, but I don't think I think it would be bombarding you with that much information. I like that type of information.
There's a lot of funding sources on
Yes.
each project.
Yeah, page
Yep.
12 has that's all the funding sources.
That's all the
correct?
funding sources, but if you were trying to do funding sources by,
Each item.
Yeah,
that might be a little, that would not
that would get my
present
head
well.
spinning.
that might not present well because you'll have geo bonds in all of them, and you'll have
Two.
TIF and
Right.
it'll go in. It's a little bit too much to do that. We do break in the following slides. We do have some detail on the two largest funding sources and how it breaks up between the bridges, fire, and different.
Okay.
So,
And just to add, in the book, there are pages for specific projects that
Right.
have all the detailed narrative behind it, revenues, expenses, timing, all of that is.
and also the funding sources in the front.
Right.
There is one list that says all the ones that are funded by ARPA. It does specific projects at that as well. So
So, sorry, so we're funding 22.9 with bonds for the Southeast Connector?
I'd have to go, off the top of my head, I don't know for sure.
The
That's
TIF,
specific.
it would be TIF bonds
bonds.
is our local match. There would be the 25 million in grant funds, and did I 11 million roughly. Yep.
11.284
And the rest would be TIF bonds.
TIF bonds, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So to look at those numbers in a line graph, you can see the carryover does significantly adjust that 23 amended number, and then kind of showing where we were going down to our kind of historical costs for in the later years.
We added that dot.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, we added that dot as well. That was where the recommended budget was for 23. So you can kind of see that the difference between where we had the recommended versus the carryover.
Actually was.
Yeah. That June 30 really does throw that CIP off. If we look at the tax-supported expenditures by category, this is that above table that kind of talked about those numbers. This shows what is being funded out or expended out of these particular categories. Obviously, the largest number of that is that 50% of those tax-supported is the street cost. The next one, obviously, is municipal buildings, but that's including MSC2, armory replacement, and fire stations, and animal shelter. So, I mean, there's a broad number of projects within that municipal buildings.
Greenhouse too.
Oh, greenhouse as well, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with the nationwide building.
It does.
Yes, it would,
Yep.
it would have
The
the armor
armory was-
replacement.
Armory replacement.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So this is all of the revenue sources or funding sources that we have within the tax-supported projects. As you can see, we did put ARPA, like I said before, all in with the 23 funds. And then as we kind of look at the different breakouts, that the 25 is where you see that the Southeast Connector, larger number at that 36 is the biggest component of that is that Southeast Connector. The stars on the general obligation and other, and then the tax increment financing, those are our two largest funding sources for the tax supported. And so we'll kind of get into the details of those specifically. Sale of land is land that within the market district area of us getting out of that. This would be the proceeds that we think we're going to get to that and putting it towards another project.
So that's just timing.
Yep.
Anticipated
Yes, we did.
happening.
Yeah. From that's we'll probably receive some in 23, but majority of it will be in 24.
Makes sense. And you anticipate from 23 to 26 that the geo bonds we're gonna do less of that. It looks like.
Yes, we were going to have to.
Ratcheting down on the GO bonds, you'll see.
I was going to say, prior to this historical investment in our geo-backed projects, we used to be at 20 to 25 million a year.
Okay.
So we are still significantly higher.
Okay.
We need to be getting like that 28, roughly in that fiscal year 28, down to that 35 for geo bonds
We do.
To maintain the rate.
to maintain what the rates that we're projecting.
So this doesn't mean we have more room because the debt that we're paying is in those years. So we don't have more room to add on to those years.
Correct, because as you issue, it's we pay for them over 20 years. We have some of the projects that we're bonding for are 5 years, some are 10, some are 15. Majority of them, when you're talking about streets, tend to be 20 years.
But we're front loading some of it.
We front load. We were able to front load a lot of our projects based off of the asset, what we refer to as an asset match. So every time we go to issue a bond, we look at each project and say, okay, the assets that are coming out of this, how long do we get out of them?
So when do we start having room? Because I think that when we were talking about, I don't know if this was a year ago or 6 months ago at this point, when we were talking about sort of like that bubble, like this that we're showing right here, it was starting to go down around 27, 28. So do we start having room in 28?
I would say within our projection, we do show a assumed debt issuance of 35 from fiscal year 28 on.
Okay.
And then it takes till about, I want to say 29 or 30 is where you'll start seeing the costs go down. Once we get to a slide that shows what the local option is covering, that's when you'll actually show where it's going to start going closer to where our rate actually is.
Okay.
In the road use tax fund, you anticipate it to be, I mean, at least $500,000 less over 25, 26, 20.
Yeah,
Is that just
that's-
being conservative?
Yes.
Well, that's.
And then
a
operations
shifting
too.
to
Yeah,
Electric
so-
vehicles.
Yep. Because as electric vehicles come into play, there's less fees that come off of the fuel sales. There are some on the registration to try and correct that, as well as discussion, I think, on electric charges to go into the road use. But as of right now, we try to be conservative. I don't want to come out of the left field saying we need to adjust the
gotcha.
tax rate.
Okay.
They've got a higher vehicle fee for the EVs that is meant to make up that revenue. Right?
It is, yeah.
That's, I don't know.
I don't know if it's a one-for-one, but for what we are projecting, we want to be on the conservative side.
Okay.
It says excludes enterprise projects, but we do have enterprise funds, waterworks in here, and then is that 50,000 a placeholder? And
Those are funding the tax supported, so they are actually transferring. It's an actual. It's the tree replacements. So some of the enterprise funds fund that. So it's a tax supported project being supported by some enterprise funds.
so is that that 3 million from 23? Is that with the enterprise funds in there, or
That's MSC2.
Oh.
So
never mind?
they're using they use the MSC2 building, so they are funding some of that cost of the building.
Yeah, expensive building.
And then state, talk to us a little bit about that, because those numbers are all over the board.
Those are based off of anticipated grants and payments from the state.
Okay.
Does that include the state revolving loan?
No, those would be in the enterprise.
Right. Okay.
What's the 3.5 then in 24?
I am not entirely sure off the top of my head. I would have to look at that
I
specifically.
mean, that's significant. And then it drops to 660, and then it gets bumped up to 1.8, and then down to 150.
There must be a known state source,
A known-
but we will figure out which one that is. I'm racking my brain. It's not
It's okay.
IRA. Yeah.
But it would be in the first couple pages of the CIP book.
Those would go
Where
up
it
as we
says
applied
state.
for more grants and things like that? Like those numbers which are going to change if we apply
Yeah,
for
those
more
will
grants?
those will change, but you'll also have the increased expense to match usually at that point. So if you look at the first couple pages where it says the funding sources by project, it then will say state, and it'll list all of the projects, and you'll be able to see which projects are specific to that state.
I have to go through every project to find it, or is it?
No, at the very front, it talks about the funding sources.
Yeah.
Thank you. So it'll be page 19 of it. And so state, the larger one that we have is the central.
19.
We've got $1 million coming in for Central Place Levee Trail.
Yeah.
And then you've got $500,000 for East University, $500,000 for Second Avenue, $700,000 for Carlisle Connection Trail, $100,000 for urban conservation projects, $300,000 for park improvements, and $400,000 for multi-use trails. Make up that 3.5 of state.
And then the 1.8 is the Southeast 14th. That's what I was.
Yes. Yep, that's 900,000 of that.
Okay.
As we go to specifically of the geo bonds by category, this kind of breaks it out between the bridge fire library of what the geo is covering throughout the book. Obviously, you can see that the largest dollars in that is the mid-20s for streets. This also includes an other category which deals with the 1,200 locust that we're still working with legal to determine what is the appropriate funding mechanism. So we did include it in the GO, but that's not going to be where that ends up, depending on the conversation that we have with legal and our bond counsel and municipal advisor.
So the library, we talked about, we're not doing GO bond. 20 years.
We're not doing 20-year debt. We're doing like 5-year debt.
Okay.
That's the asset match approach where we talk
Right.
about those.
Okay, I just want to make sure we've still.
Yeah, we're not paying 20 years on something that we no
Okay.
longer
Gonna be
have.
out.
The second largest funding source is that TIF bonds by category. Again, these are different projects that we're doing that are funded by the urban renewal bonds, covering that, abating that. And as you can see, the biggest portion of that as well is on streets.
Remind me, can TIF go anywhere in the urban renewal district, or can it only be spent in the TIF?
So the categories are, you have an urban renewal area, and then you have TIFs within that urban renewal. You can have multiple TIFs within an urban renewal area. So you can spend whatever increment is generated from a TIF district within that urban renewal.
Okay, but anywhere within the urban renewal area?
Yep.
Okay.
This is a slide that I like to point out with the addition of local option. If we didn't have local option and we did everything that we have in the CIP book, as well as doing the asset match that matches up where we're paying for stuff in the appropriate amount of years that the assets are supposed to last, this shows the difference between what that tax rate would have had to have been versus what our tax rate is. As you can see, that goes from that very first year was $1, and then this is showing all the way out to the fiscal year 27, almost $2.80 difference.
So this is that bubble. When does it start to go down?
I want to say if I were to add like 2 or 3 years, that's when it starts.
Okay, so the 2930, we're getting back to our project
where it would
being
start.
at our tax rate, and
Wow. To get back down to what the tax rate would be, I don't think we ever will, because of the local option is anticipated for that 50% property tax relief, so there will always be that gray. But the peak of that gray bar, I think the very next line, very next year was anticipated to be $6.05 and then $6.25, and then it goes down to like $6.10, so that it takes another 2 years for it to peak.
Okay.
As we kind of talk through some of the different specific projects, we're kind of breaking them up into things that we have as ongoing projects where we have annual allocations to them. What we decided to do here is kind of list those ongoing projects, but give you the dollar amount within the fiscal year 24 budget, because that's ultimately what you're approving and gets set to the state for the 24 budget is the capital project, even though we're approving the full 5 years in the CIP plan. So I'm giving you the specific dollars for that particular year. This first part is about $10 million, and that kind of spreads across kind of our IT work, fire equipment, NDC, NFC contributions, library, citywide bridge repair. And then as we go into building projects for ongoing, we do have building improvements that kind of as needed across buildings across the city facilities, as well as re-roofing, energy conservation, and security improvements.
And I have a question about the public art.
Okay.
And I know that the ordinance says that it'll be funded at a level equal to 1.5% of the amount of general obligation funds appropriated for capital improvement. So are we designating enough money to public art?
This was a $200,000 as our the last year's budget. We moved from $100,000 to $200,000, I think, to reflect close to that, but I don't know if that calculation is done.
I think there's two questions there. That's our contribution
Because that
to
other
the
100,000 was done when they came to us and said we need
additional.
We need some additional funds.
And
But
so
I'm
that
just
moved.
wondering if that really reflects 1.5% of the amount of general obligation.
And
Fine.
that's a good conversation to bring back separately, that as we do facilities, because that's applicable to vertical
And
infrastructure.
when should I bring that back?
I can bring that back immediately. Yep. And so, again, it really only applies to facilities, I believe. It's all vertical infrastructure only.
Whereas a majority of our costs are streets.
Public art fund at a level equal to 1.5% the amount of general obligation. So I would think whatever our general obligation funds are, 1.5% should be set aside for public art
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah, it's been applied for only the vertical, so that's why I think we have to
I
bring
know.
it back to,
But I'm looking
Yeah.
at the ordinance.
Okay.
Okay, let's
Yep.
just bring that back.
let's do that.
As we look at the ongoing parks projects, we do have quite a few annual allocations between cemetery improvements, building improvements, park improvements, infrastructure, sport complex, playgrounds. So they kind of break up a lot of the different categories within the park system to be able to then figure out which parks would then fall within these ongoing projects.
Nick, on swimming pools and aquatic infrastructure, is 200,000 enough?
No.
Was there talk of having some sort of a community-wide conversation about pools, indoor and outdoor, and maybe that's happened and I'm not aware. Could you refresh my memory on that?
Yeah, I would say kind of, right? And so my understanding, and we can have, as part of this, bringing back the public art and some of these other topics in a workshop, we can have Ben talk through his participation in a committee that was established that had the school district, the city, and other sports facility property managers and owners that came together to talk about where gymnasiums are located across our city and what availability there were. Pools were part of that conversation as well. So we can get input from Ben on how those conversations went. There were, I guess it'd be about 10 years ago now, there was a study on just pools that a consultant did. And so we could bring that back as a discussion as well to see if that needs to be refreshed. But that was looking at just the city's pool assets and recommendations that came out of that study from about 10 years ago.
So there could be part two of a kind of conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds like there needs
I
to
think-
be.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the study had came back that we needed
Two regional.
two new aquatic centers on
Well,
North, and I mean, that was.
yes, but then to get rid of the others,
Yeah,
so
the
that
others
didn't go
would
very
away,
far.
But they would be big aquatic centers, like one on the north side and one on the south side.
I do recall that was what the recommendation that came out of that.
was
So
10 years ago.
I believe I was a finance, so yes.
Was that the conversation about closing Birdland and people didn't like that?
Nor the other pools, but
Yeah.
yes.
I just remember having heard about that. Obviously, it was before my time.
Yes, and as you might imagine, even 10 years ago, very expensive proposition to put two new pools in.
Yeah, what
Of
was it,
that.
like 100 million or?
It was, I believe it was.
I can only imagine today.
Right.
The last ongoing projects are what's allocated for the kind of the street categories between the sidewalks, the traffic system, and concrete rehabilitation and reconstruction. So that kind of shows the breakout of those sidewalks and roadway reconstruction are the larger dollars on that allocation. Going from the ongoing, the other thing we wanted to kind of talk about is highlight some of the more significant projects, the non-ongoing, so that you can kind of see which ones out of each of the categories is kind of the significant ones to look at. From bridges, we have Walnut Street Bridge, which additional funds will be needed to actually to do that. This was originally just the amount, I think, to do just minor, just to repair it versus full rehabilitation. So that might need another $9 million, I think.
So that wasn't, we weren't going to use it for vehicles, or we were just going to do the deck, or how was
I
that?
believe this figure contemplated a major rehab, but not a reconstruction, which we now believe would be the right answer. And so that's why we would need to add additional funds, is because we want to, it needs to either move forward as a complete reconstruction or a complete rethink on how to even have that space used.
But it's going to last longer than a rehab. The year, if we rebuild it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
So the
by
additional-
decades.
The additional 9 million putting into it going to get us
Yes. And
years. Right.
yep, and that's all part of the engineering study that came back and said we'd actually be better to just replace the bridge.
Right. Okay.
But then best estimate right now is that would add 9 million to that figure. So
And the
we delayed the project for 1 year to work through that, and I've gotten some input but haven't made it all the way through the council to make that adjustment to a brand new bridge.
But it's not going to get any cheaper to delay it
Right.
another year.
Correct. Correct. But we have to find those funds.
Again, there's not a lot of wiggle room in this.
Mm-mm.
The municipal building is the largest one on there, is that city facility and army replacement. So that includes both the purchase and some renovations as well within that for anticipation of the OPN and the due diligence that we have. This allows us to at least have something in place if we move forward with that project.
So this is to replacement, the purchase price is one thing, but to retrofit it and everything would be that much more?
With a phase one, not full. This has both the building and the garage, as well as
Have the police academy in there, or no?
that would have to be a part of the phase one to be able to include that in there. I think and you want to look at the specific page itself to be able to look at that. That I think it shows 40 million
Was the
of for alterations
Alterations that much?
for a phase one. A phase two would have to be discussed with if the OPN and the due diligence of if that makes sense. We'd have to figure out how that would work for a full renovation, or just in splitting it up in between phases. But this allows at least 40 million in alterations.
And this is our estimate, not the people that are going through it right now.
Yes, that's just that was finance trying to put some
Okay.
funding.
Got it. I just wanted to know if we had the reports, anything back yet, so.
No.
Okay.
No. Next 2 months, 3 months.
But you still have police building improvements in the budget here. So are we still going to have to do the improvements if we move out of that building? Or
There's
is
going to be
that
a
gonna
timing.
They're finishing up the basement improvements are significant. Yeah.
Okay.
Restrooms and some other things
Yeah.
structurally and drainage. Before you move off, Nick, there was a question about water trails. And I'm not recalling myself, but we've committed $6 million. How
Of
does this,
contributions, yes. This in this plan, there's still 5 within this 24 through 27.
was there $1 million already? in
Between
the pa-
22 and 23.
$1
So this does not change the $6
No,
million.
it does not change the 6 million. This just shows within the fiscal years 24 through 27, there's still 5 million yet to be contributed.
One other question on that water trails. It looked to me, not that this 5 million covers it, but obviously all the contributions. They're moving ahead with Scott Street. It looks like they're going to remove like 100 trees down there, including cottonwoods and whatever that seem to be nesting in the home for all the eagles that are up and down here. What, really?
If you want to.
It's almost
be
as
able to
many as
comment on
Wakanda removed, huh?
There are very strict rules and regulations on the tree removal, and so.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Water trails, they're removing about 150 trees at Scott Avenue. It's over 3 acres. It's within a certain limit needed to construct the project. It's within the regulations of DNR, improved through the federal highway and the environmental document. The habitat for the Indiana bats are in the trees, so we have to remove those trees before the end of March. The eagles, it's not nesting eagle sites that are being disturbed. Eagles will probably be disturbed. Other birds will probably be disturbed. Most of them will go away as soon as the change starts. There's no requirement that we have to relocate the birds or anything like that. It's part of the construction project. And it's all been authorized through the DOT, Federal Highway, DNR. All the experts have reviewed the project.
All the experts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do construction at all, Mayor.
We already cut down a bunch of trees at Prospect Park, isn't that right, for water trails?
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
We already cut down a bunch of trees at Prospect Park for water trails?
I think we already have.
Already did.
Yeah, no, that happened.
Yep, they got cut because
Half a year
last
ago.
year they thought they were going to construction, and they needed to be cut by the end of March for the same reason.
For the bats. Yeah.
And other species, not to catch them in the nesting.
It was part of the plan, it's been reviewed, and it's necessary to construct the project.
As we move to parks, we do have a couple of specific park projects that are on the significant side here that are showing the Birdland, Northside Community Center, principal park improvements, levee, trail, as well as spray grounds and playground improvements.
Some of that Northside Community Center money went over to ARPA, correct? So this is just the amount that's left in the, or is that the entire
It's just
amount?
showing the project.
This is just showing the project costs from 24 through 27, I believe.
Should it be higher than that, though? Or is that not including the ARPA allocation?
It would be all funds. But again, you have to realize that there should be a significant dollar in 23 that is a carryover that until the projects are done would
Gotcha.
continue to carry over.
Gotcha.
The total amount still is there. It's just the way we were showing this is the 24 through 27 because
So
the
we're spacing
23 is
the
kind of a unique carry forward timing issue that
Oh, so we allocated it in 23, and if it doesn't get spent in 23, it gets carried over, and so it's the same amount. Okay.
Yep.
Can you talk to me about Central Place Levee Trail? Is that 4.1 million including the roadway improvements on Hickman? Because the from 6th to Prospect was already funded, but is that in Central Place Levee Trail? It's because it wouldn't be listed in roads; it would be listed in parks then.
I don't believe it is, but. I
Okay,
don't
we
know
can talk
if-
about that.
Yeah, no, David's saying it's not.
Okay.
I have a question about streets. We had really made the commitment on East University, and I know Steve had given me an update on where we are, but it's still quite a ways out. What are we going to do to bump that up? Where we had the young student that was killed?
Yeah. We have accelerated that as much as we can.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it doesn't get left behind.
Oh, gosh, no.
And I know it wouldn't be listed in significant projects, it wouldn't, but can you talk to me about Beaverdale Park getting included in our budget? It's
Yes.
not in the recommended CIP book, but we've talked about that.
Yes, it is. It is going to be fit in for that 100,000 in the last year of the CIP.
with potential to move up with fundraising.
Yeah, if there's an opportunity to get private funding, then that can be moved up. That would need to happen quickly.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
As we move to new projects, this kind of breaks out some of the new projects that we have on in the CIP plan within the 24-27 that are greater than $1 million. As you can see, we've got East Army Post, East University, Glendale Abbey restoration, and then we also have these 4 projects that have planning funds at the tail end of the CIP plan. So we would have to, in subsequent years, try to fit in those costs of construction in later CIPs. And then also add is the outdoor warning siren system replacement that I think has been around for over 3 decades.
The major road project, there's one that noticeably missing that I had spoke about earlier, and I know on page 164 we've got a study from Dartway to McKinley on Southwest 9th, and I mean it's listed as a high injury network corridor, and I guess once we go through the study and we make some changes, but I mean, I think these changes are more for pedestrian crosswalk to McRae Park on Bancroft, where the park entrance is, but there really isn't a lot of type of reconstruction in here. So I would ask if we're looking at planning funds for major road constructions, once we get the study back, I believe that we're going to have to make some changes on that corridor.
And that's where we'll have to try and figure out where it fits in with the current funding that we have available and where we need to adjust shuffling around projects and what goes into that 28 budget, which would be the next CIP plan.
And as we go through this, there's 175,000 in 23, 700,000 in 24. The study will be completed this year. Is how I would assume that would be.
Next year. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Mayor, members of council, Steve Neighbor, city engineer. So the study is there's money for the study programmed in next fiscal year, so it'd be done in 2024. So it would be the completion of the study.
So what's the 175 then? And
that's for we're looking at crosswalk improvements at Bancroft. We also are looking at there's been some development on the south side of Thomas Beck to add sidewalks along Thomas Beck. So it would be to start that work, to start the design.
So we would be able to do that in 23. Then that work is that is important that we able to do some of that.
In 23 we would do the design of that work. So that work would probably start construction in 24. So.
And then that's where but there's no planning. The construction, you have 700,000 in there. So when is the study mixed into that 23 funding?
It is. It looks like the sheet has been merged with 2 projects. So it's the study is about a couple $100,000 that would take place in fiscal year 24. And then at the same time, they would start construction of that other project, which is the Thomas Beck sidewalks, Bancroft Road crosswalk and improvements.
So that would be July 1st. We're going to start some of that, or are we going to start it in the spring of that crosswalk and the sidewalk on that
I don't
corridor?
know.
I mean, because you've got some money in this budget, 23 and 24, to do some of these things.
The 175 is my understanding is for design. That's correct. Yeah. So then the first construction dollars would be in FY would be next year. So we'd be able to start it in the summer. Essentially, is that what? In the calendar year 24.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the 1.5 million you have in there for the following
That's to
year?
finish. That's it. The project would take place over 2 fiscal years. The Thomas Beck sidewalks and the crosswalk. So to read it all.
Okay. Well, that
So, yeah.
I
so,
mean,
yeah.
we're talking $2 million to get on Thomas Beck Road down put in a crosswalk.
My understanding is it's actually we would actually be reducing the number of lanes of Thomas Beck. So be moving curbs to fit the sidewalks in from Southwest 7th down to Southwest 9th, and then do the improvements at Bancroft.
So it's already 3 lane. I mean, it's 2 lanes on one side as you go underneath the Southwest 9th Bridge, and then it's basically 1 lane on the other side with a big median in the middle of it, with no sidewalks.
Right. So we would likely take away that south lane and move the curb in.
I mean, it's 2 years.
It's overlapping of 2 fiscal years. So yeah.
The calendar year 24 is fiscal year 24 and 25.
Yeah.
And then we're not even tackling the problem where we've had multiple accidents and people have died, and the rest of the street needs reconstructed because it's massive potholes all throughout the entire corridor. I mean, the street needs reconstructed, and there's nothing. I mean, we can continue the conversation, but there's nothing in here. When I see other projects on here that we have no funding, I mean, you can't just keep leaving one part of the city behind. And sometimes I feel like that we do that. And I mean, I know I'm not blaming anybody, but it just seems like that we're shutting the door on one of the busiest corridors. It says it right here, that has the highest injury network corridor. And I mean, and we're not addressing that. And it's not like it's something new that we've talked about. I mean, these accidents have occurred over the last 5 years pretty regularly each year, where people have gotten injured or killed. And I mean, you and I can have a longer discussion about it, but I mean, I truly want to point that out, and that is part of it's the first time January 1st that I took over part of that corridor, at least half of it. Councilmember Mandelbaum has the other half. But I mean, that's something that we need to, all the money can't just stay in Ward 3, okay? And do all the changes that we do and make the corridors and safer and things like that. And when I drive around the city, it seems like Wards 1 and Wards 3 are getting the dollars put in there in the infrastructure. And
Well,
we're leaving part of the city.
Mayor, if I
That's
could.
backed up by the numbers.
We're leaving part of the city behind.
Mr. Manager?
Yeah, and the money's being spread out quite a bit. But I hear you, and we can have a very specific discussion on Southwest 9th Street issues. That I think that is very valid.
I mean, other than Southeast 14th, that's probably where people have died over the last 5 years in pedestrian accident, more than anywhere else in our city.
We've talked about that need.
And the
For
study,
years.
Right. The study piece I thought that was already in progress. So
It was actually, the budget request was submitted in the last budget cycle.
Right.
But I think where the funds allowed for it, it got put in 2024 for the study. So
I have to disagree that the money's being spread out. I mean, I've been asking for months now, since, the end of last year, for a layout of how we are spending our money by ward, by census tract, by different allocations. Literally just in this budget, if we're just looking at road reconstruction and we're just looking at the projects that are in a specific ward, Ward 1's getting 26.4%, Ward 2 is getting 11%, Ward 3 is getting 45%, Ward 4 is getting 18%.
Yeah, but we can go back to previous years where the former council member that sat in your seat had a ton of work done.
No, yeah, what I'm saying is it's not being spread out evenly, and I don't think it's being spread out by need either. And I've been asking for a breakdown of that, to see like where is the highest need and are we spending the money there? I don't think it's getting broken down that way. Like why are Ward 2 and Ward 4 getting 11% and 18% when you guys have some of the roads that need the most work?
In the majority of a lot of the Wards 4, I had a lot of the bridges and things like that. So you can say, well, we spent the money in Ward 4, but yeah,
But it's Ward 3 now.
We reconstructed all these bridges, and that was, millions and millions of dollars, but that's not corridor infrastructure improvements that really our neighborhoods need and to strengthen our neighborhoods. And so that's, we're not going to solve anything today with it. We need to bring that to your attention, and that study needs to get going. Whether we need to find, $175,000 for a study, is that what we're going to pay somebody?
It's actually $200,000. Yeah.
$200,000 for a study, and we don't have the capacity and the wherewithal with your staff to do what we need to do. We have to have a consultant do that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that's not going to be done it's not going to be completed until when?
Until probably mid to late 2024. The calendar.
That's not acceptable.
Because we don't have any money to start it until July 1.
Yeah. But it was supposed to be started last year.
We had submitted a budget request to try to start it last year, but my understanding, and I defer to city manager, there wasn't funding, so it got put in this year. So, but yeah, the budget request was submitted.
We're going to have to address that in this budget cycle because we can't wait 2 more years when this is probably the most deadliest corridor that we've had in the last 5 years.
I will say people in Ward 1 are bringing up Southwest 9th, so.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's obvious just from the accidents and stuff. So I appreciate the official study, but I think we all have dollars or how you want allocated dollars. Everybody has their project they want. So I think if there's other reconfigurations to move things and reallocate, then if that's a priority, then that's something we'll have to look at. But it's probably at the expense of something maybe else. So just
Well, I'm not going to rob from Peter to pay Paul in Ward 4.
Well, I'm not saying from each ward. I think we have to look at throughout the whole city. If this is truly one of the roads that's the most dangerous throughout, then it's something we need to address, and we can't. It's an issue not by ward, but by issue. What is the need?
And I've heard from Public Works that we are no longer, allocating things to get 25% in each ward. That's absolutely fine. Right. But I haven't seen that we're allocating it by need either. And so I'd like to see a breakdown of, road miles and the need for reconstruction or and how we're spending that money that is city money, not the specific grant money and all those things like that.
Okay. We can bring that back.
I think and we're making the improvements with the help of the state. It's East 14th and Murray. That's another high accident.
Yeah, it was one of the highest in the state.
Right, absolutely it is. And luckily the state's going to participate. But I bet this part of this corridor on Southwest 9th is right up there with it, with the fatalities that we've had. Mm-hmm. And so I just
okay,
we can have that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The last slide I have here is in order to maintain or avoid future rate increases to the debt service tax levy and bond rating issues, we would need to begin. It shows that decrease down to the 39 and 26, 27, and then it would need to be going down to that 35 of a target for GO bonds specifically in that 25, 28 and on to avoid even beyond what we're currently showing as possible rate increases needed just for the debt service side. Any other questions?
The only thing left that I have is I think that some projects are still listed under the old ward boundaries.
Oh.
And so I just think that needs to be updated just so we can figure out where we're talking about.
So Mayor and Council, I've taken notes on what to bring back in a workshop setting that includes the allocation breakdown, I'll call that, with street projects and others, the public art discussion, later on the food security a few months out, so that would not occur in the next couple weeks. What else am I looking at here? I think that kind of covers it. And then some thoughts on how we would adjust Southwest 9. So add to that list if you wish. Personally, let me, give me a call on other things that you identify, what you hear from the public, obviously, bring to me, and we'll set a date. You've worked through this rather quickly and efficiently. Thank you, Nick and Joe, again this morning. So we're going to give you back some time now, and remind you that if you want to use some of our time Monday morning to call me to stop in, that time is available to you.
Monday morning?
No, that was left just as a reserve. Am I forgetting anything? Okay, yeah, that was left in reserve.
Right.
Nope.
So is that drop in or making
Make an appointment. Let me know if you're going to be jumping in so that I can be prepared and potentially have Nick with me if need be. Mayor, I think that's it.
All right, everybody, thank you all for attending. Thank you for the staff presentation and support. Mr. Manager, it sounds like, as you've already noted, we've got some things to think about, talk about, and try to see if we can resolve. Until next time, this meeting's adjourned.